All right, trying to make Instagram work. See, yeah. Showing up there, going everywhere.
If we pull this off, we're geniuses. If we're able to really successfully show up in 3 different places at once, we have defied the laws of space and time.
It's true, it's true. Like a true broadcasting network.
That's right. That's right.
Mm. Okay, yeah, great.
Hello,
Okay, so
Christine.
hi, Christine. Yeah, it looks like we're seeing comments at least from YouTube.
Mhm.
So we'll see if what else ever shows up. Um, I don't know what mine. Well, I might not be able to see Instagram ones. It looks like maybe.
If you have a comment to share, head on over to our YouTube
Oh, there
page
we go.
because
Okay,
that
I got
may
it.
be
I
our
got it.
link.
I got it. I got
Oh,
it.
it's
Okay.
working? It's
Yes,
working.
yes, yes. I've
Amazing.
got. Okay,
Okay.
I just need to put them in a place that I can see them, so that I can. Okay, great. We're just seeing comments everywhere.
Yeah. I think the Facebook ones, if we get any from there, will show up in this chat.
Great.
But yeah, they should show up here. We'll see.
Amazing. Okay, so this is just like gonna be like a little quick and dirty like check-in with the two of us.
Yeah.
Which I'm looking forward to. So hope presuming people are here because they've either heard about or have listened to this latest Rosemore Roundtable deep dive we did that was all about the romance audiobook community and how we show up in person and online. And it was how many? It was 5 parts, yeah?
5 parts, and which we recorded over 2 months,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, with a lot of, stuff at the front end of that, trying to and in the middle as well, just trying to create it all and outline it and do all the research and conversations that it took to make that. So yeah, it sure was a deep dive.
We went like a
Yes.
little bit too deep and then like zoomed in. We definitely like started and we were like, okay, wait, no. We're very thoughtful, I'll say, in terms of like maybe too thoughtful. But
Mhm.
yeah, so if you haven't checked it out, you can look up the Rosemore Roundtable. The episodes are on YouTube, but also any podcast platform of choice. It's a lot of content, but we really tried to go through what we wanted to do was kind of go back and say, like, we felt that we were in a kind of inflection point in the community. A lot has happened over the last few years in terms of how this community has grown and how people find community and engage online or at conventions. And we wanted to reflect on that, on how we show up, how that impacts all the people that are a part of that, whether or not
Mhm.
they're authors or narrators or listeners or content creators. So we really dug into we got like really like nerdy and like did a lot of research for how we got to this moment. We talked to a ton of people through online surveys and in-person interviews to get as much varied perspective as we could on that. And then we put it all online in this 5-part series. And the last part is where we tried to keep our own personal reflections out of this as much as possible. But we did spend the last episode, you know, giving our own feedback on what has come up for us. And so we wanted
Right.
today to kind of, now that it's done and it's all out there, be sure to remind people that it is out there. Talk a little bit about, now that it's over and done, do we have any personal reflections on how we've changed or think about things? And then if anybody has listened or is thinking about listening or has questions, let them come in and comment. And then give you an idea of what's coming up for the next few episodes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Amazing.
so I yeah, I mean, I have so just in terms of the impact doing this deep dive has had on me, I feel like I can't stop thinking about it. First of all, I'll just name that I listened back through each episode a number of times because I wanted to hear it all cut together and everything, but also I think obviously each one informed the next. And so as we were going into whatever was coming next, I wanted to make sure to reflect back on what we just did.
Uh-huh.
And so it's just been in my head a lot through all of that. And I feel like everything I've done, every online interaction, a lot of the just sort of choices I've made in general, both in this space and other parts of my life, I've done a lot of thinking about, especially those last 2 episodes where we brought a bit more of our own experiences into the conversation, and thinking about like, okay, am I showing up in the ways that I have named that I want to be? Am I consistent in that? Do I still stand by the things that I said?
Yeah.
That's been on my mind a lot, which is kind of cool. Like to, I guess, like the whole reason we have this podcast is because there's a lot of stuff that you and I are constantly personally reflecting on, and oftentimes we're turning to each other to reflect on, not just about um, social media and online and in-person engagement, but of all sorts of things. And I feel like this deep dive was kind of um, the epitome of that, right? Like it really brought up this opportunity to self-reflect, to kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture, hear from other people, and think about it from myself. Like what
Hmm.
how am I digesting these things that I'm hearing from the rest of the community? And that has just felt like a real gift, I think, for me to like not only get to have these conversations with you and with all these people in our community, but now after it's all said and done, still feel like I'm learning from having had that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there was a lot of stuff for me that was really helpful to be reminded how it's, like, so different for so many different people. Like, it's
Mhm, mhm,
how presumptive I was about a lot of things. Well, like, clearly everybody feels this way. And then in,
mm,
having the opportunity, so many people were so lovely in terms of trusting us with their perspective and that we would handle it in a thoughtful way, which I hope that they
yeah.
still feel that way. I think we got a lot of feedback that it was. But that it just helps, like, color in some, like, blind spots for me or shed light on some blind
Mhm,
spots for
mhm.
me, and, I mean, ultimately, sometimes made it more challenging in my own self-reflections because it's like, "Oh, well, now I'm, like, considering this whole very, like, nuanced picture," and, as we've discussed, like, then it makes it really hard sometimes to choose which way to go forward, that it's like
Mhm.
it's kind of nicer when you've got blinders on and you're like, "Well, it's either left or right," and when you actually dig into these things, you see, actually, it's like up, down, sideways, all
Right.
around, twirl around. You're like, "God damn it." That's been, like, an interesting thing that's come up for me. It's definitely made me, um, I'm a chronic overthinker, and now I'm just thinking even more about all of, just how the impact, I think, of the choices we make, both,
Mhm.
online and in person, has been a lot. And also made me really realize, like, the volume and pace at which this community consumes and generates content. Like, as I've
Yeah.
forced myself to slow down and consider what I'm doing, then being in a position to be like, "Oh my gosh, like, everybody is, like, reading so much, there's so many books out there, they're producing so much content,"
Mhm.
and finding a way to, like, surf that and not get sort of pulled under in that undertow is important. Molly makes fun of me for overthinking, and she goes, "Overthinking you?" Yeah, yeah, no, obviously.
I mean, I think we both suffer from that affliction in a pretty big way.
Yeah, um, but yeah, so I think that, like, for me, that's been one of the, like, light bulbs that has happened to me of, like, being much more aware of that tempo, and there's nothing, I mean, we can do about it at this
Mhm.
point. Like, I feel like the community is, like, its own thing now, so it's just how we let me stretch the metaphor, grab our surfboards and get on the waves of content. Okay, I'm gonna stop. But you know what I'm talking about? Like,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
that
yeah.
awareness of how much is out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can get really, and we talked about this in the podcast, it's bringing up for me that discussion we had about, I forget the phrase you used, but about like the trends, like getting on the train of like, oh, everybody's posting about this thing, and so I need to do it too. That
Mhm.
kind of like the June is audiobook month stuff was an example that we used. It can get really overwhelming thinking about like, oh, I'm paying so much attention to what these other people are doing, and it's all really great. And like, am I missing out if I'm not a part of it? Or like, do I need to be sure that I stay on top of engaging with their things? And like, it's a lot. It's its own job. Obviously, it's a job that a lot of people have now of
Yeah.
just engaging in this online space in this way. Um, and so it is, yeah, I agree that like seeing it from all angles in the way that we got to in this deep dive really brings a helpful perspective of, okay, I can just take a deep breath and like sort of sail across the top of this and not necessarily have to be, you know, as deeply like get as deep into those cycles as I thought, you know.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I've definitely picked up more on noticing how people feel a responsibility to like keep up on,
Mhm.
anything from like, oh, I want to be sure that I'm engaging with your content that you're creating online, but also people who are like really active listeners or readers in the community becoming really big fans of various authors and feeling like they got to keep up with
Mm.
everybody's releases. And I think the thing to remember that I
Mhm.
always try to tell people, like, I'll get DMs sometimes for people going, oh, because I sometimes go through phases of an absurd amount of work like comes out at once, and I'll get a DM, oh gosh, I want to listen to it all. I can't. It's like the beauty of it is that it's written, it's recorded, it's not going
Right.
anywhere. So
Right.
like add it to the list, get to it when you can, but don't maybe try to take away some of this like mm, there's a due date and we must be here because it's all like just something that we put on ourselves.
Mhm.
And there's actually something I've been talking with a lot of other producers and authors about this, that there's actually something great, as wonderful as like release lift energy is, there's actually something really great when people go back and rediscover books and bring fresh energy to a book or a series. Like I'm
Mhm.
seeing this right now with the Elizabeth O'Rourke summer series because the final book is coming out, and a couple people have done like buddy reads or like encouraging people to do it, and like that's great for like me as somebody who worked on those, but also authors. So for me, it's a reminder that it's like the timelines are just arbitrary. We've just decided to put them out there.
Right.
Yeah, engaging when you're going to engage is great. Like there's
Yeah.
no.
And I will say being on the receiving end of when people go and consume something that I did years ago is always so like just sort of a side note. It's always really fun, I think, to find out that, oh, I did that. I don't know if I didn't forget about it, but like I've moved on to these like, 50 other books since then or whatever. And it always just makes me smile when I see that, oh, people are still listening to that, because for us, I think we do it, we go on to the next thing, and it's easy to forget that, like you just said, it lives on. It's going to
Mhm.
be out there for, for the foreseeable future. And so people are still going to keep coming back to it with, and that's a nice thing. It's nice to have those reminders.
Yeah, it's like
Mhm.
sort of the definition of evergreen content in terms of stuff
Mm,
that's not
mhm,
gonna go anywhere, and I think if we can I guess if there's one big takeaway for me from this, it was that, like, we could all afford to, like, slow down in our
mhm,
responses, in our not be so ready to just, like, you know, flame response or whatever it is, like, or feel like, "I gotta read this, I gotta do that, do that." And so, like,
mhm,
if we can slow down, then it actually benefits everybody, and even these releases that feel like, they need it, or, these months that celebrate people, it's kinda great if it's not June is audiobook month, but then somebody in October is like, "I'm just shouting out audiobooks, and here's a list of
mhm,
narrators I like." Like, it's great whenever you decide to do it. Um,
mhm.
and so I think it's for me, it's as arbitrary as, like, I do understand that number of books that narrators wanna hit is, like, an important, mile marker for some people, but I also
Mhm.
feel is just kind of, like, arbitrary, like, we just decided
Yeah.
that it means something.
Yeah.
So as much as we can lean out of that stuff, I think it puts us in a healthier headspace to then interact with each other as just, like, human beings. That, I think, was my big, like, lesson in my heart that I took away from spending 2
Mhm.
months digging into this community and how it engages with each other.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if, and we wanted to kind of, if anybody has questions, who hasn't listened yet, or if you have listened and you have any questions about, I don't know what kind of questions about the deep dive, how we did it, whatever. I don't know what the questions would be, but put them in. I think we can see all the chats, so feel free to shout them out. Um,
Yeah. I feel like I'm
that's up
in,
for
like, some movie as, like, the IT hacker with, like, 4 screens up. And I'm like, "Where are all the comments coming from? I will find the comments."
you. If you don't know, if you're watching and you don't realize this, we are currently streaming this to Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook all at the same time, which is a new experience for,
Yeah,
for
nice
us. So
level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why we are looking
Moving
at
into our
various.
network television era.
That's right. That's right. Rosemont Roundtable takes on TV.
I mean, I can speak to some feedback that we've personally received that I think it's been
Mhm.
interesting, for people to, like, reflect on their own. I think similar for us, that there's been a lot of feedback that people kinda gave and said, like, "Yeah, this actually made me pause and think, like, how I'm engaging, not just being thoughtful about what you're highlighting on what's actually
Mhm.
happening," but and I think that that was a lot of our hope, was that we could all
Mhm.
do that, which was really great. Um,
I've
the
also heard
Go
from
ahead.
folks that said similarly to what we were saying, that the chance to kind of hear other people, they were surprised,
Mhm.
also kind of had this thought of like, oh, everybody has this experience, but then hearing the variety of experiences and touch points people have um, in engaging in these spaces in these ways is actually surprising and interesting to reflect on, that it's not necessarily the same for everybody. I've heard that from a couple of people.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. Some things that are popping up in the Instagram chat comments. Molly's really proud of us for doing well with the tech. Thank you, Molly. We're proud of ourselves
Thank
too.
you.
Christine's proud of our multitasking. But John asked this question, how do we think TikTok has changed the book world? And John, I would recommend if you dive into the deep dive, I think we dig into a lot of the impact of how that as a platform has become a place that has changed a lot of standards for how people
Mhm.
engage online, has created a lot of opportunities for people to, like, find and establish and develop careers, and
Mhm.
we really dig into, like, it's not just TikTok did happen and is its own phenomenon, but really came out of some tech and things that were changing in our actor industries as far back
Mhm.
as, like, 2007. So, we really kinda dig into that trail of how we got there, and then also the
Mhm.
impact of TikTok on things. So we would recommend listening to hear all the places we go with it. Um, Annette mentioned that she, appreciated that we just shared, like, ourselves and allowed people to, like, get to know us
Mhm.
personally better. And I think it was something we were both nervous about as we
Yeah,
were going
definitely.
through, and I can say on the other side of it, I am still a little bit nervous because I don't think that, like, by the end there, we were really I think that last piece of it shares a lot of our own personal perspectives
Mhm.
and insights just to, like, live on the internet,
Right.
um,
I
and
think
which is
that's
not
such a huge
yeah.
piece of it, is that it's the living on forever. Like, I'm happy all the things we discussed. I feel like I've had bits and pieces of those conversations with lots of people, in this sort of book world that we're in and out of it too. But there is something about having that kind of conversation in a public way.
Mhm.
Um, that's super vulnerable, or that's how I felt being
So,
a part
yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Um, and that's scary. But it felt really necessary to bring that to the conversation, because as you said at the top of this, like, so many people were so generous with their own thoughts and sharing that with us, and it wouldn't really we are not journalists, so we
Yeah.
can't take ourselves entirely out of the conversation. We're very much in the mix of all the things that we're discussing.
Mhm.
And it really wouldn't be right to have had the conversation in the way that we did without, I think, bringing in our own reflections as well. So, but it was hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of us, I think a lot of what, like, pushed us forward with that was that right exactly what you said, was that for us to kind of practice what we were preaching, people had shared a lot of their personal perspectives, so we felt that we
Mhm,
owed to share that same degree of honesty
mhm,
with people. Um, yeah. Monica says that she learned a lot and reflected a lot listening to the episodes, and I think that that's, like, it's funny when we were talking about, like, "Oh, we want more people to, like, know about this and have this conversation," like, I don't think which is, I think, great for us because that's how we operate, that people's responses or questions can't be boiled down to kind of like a quick question. I think it was, like, a
mhm,
real, like, good meaty beef stew that people just, like, sat with, and we're like, "Yeah, this
mhm,
brought
mhm,
up, like, a lot of things to think
mhm,
about and consider." Somebody else yes, somebody mentioned that it's a different kind of vulnerability putting ourselves out there than acting because 'cause we're putting ourselves out there, but that our perspectives were
absolutely.
appreciated. Um, And somebody asked, how do we see social media affecting the book industry in the future? And I think like
Mm,
we did the way that we talked about this in the episodes, I mean, I think we do reflect on how much um it's and we dig into it a lot of like how between both the pathways to like indie publishing blowing it up, but then also social media being a secondary thing where then those everybody who was indie publishing could find their communities and then, you know, could surface thing. I think the biggest impact for us was its ability to create community and allow people to find each other. But again,
mhm.
it's I don't think that I have like a clear, like hot, quick takeaway because we dug into it with so much nuance and its impact on it. I mean, it's a juggernaut that fundamentally changed it and will continue to change it. And I think for much
Mhm.
like a completely different episode, the way that like AI is here and you have to figure out how to navigate that, like social media is here. I mean, it came on the scene, I think, as we said, like in the early 2000s, but has just been kind of rolling its way through the industry and impacting it.
Right, well, and the pandemic change, and we talk about
Right.
this a lot over the course of all the episodes, but the pandemic certainly changed um, the role that social media plays in all of our lives, not just within this industry or
Mhm.
within this community. And I think we're in this moment in time now, we're seeing the impact of that shift, right? We're seeing, okay, it became the only thing we had, and then it became seemingly, too much in a number of ways. And now people are sort of finding their ways to step back where it feels important to do so, or lean in more where it feels important to do so. And I think that's kind of, I think we're at just in talking with so many people, it feels like we're at a point where people are starting to reflect on that a lot more.
Yeah.
It showed up, nobody knew what it was. They started to engage. Fast forward to the pandemic, and it just became the lifeline, and so there
Mhm.
wasn't time to think about it, and there wasn't a desire to think about it as much. It was like we all needed it,
Mhm.
or so many of us that needed it. And now we're at this point where I think for a lot of people, and I know myself, I include myself in this, are thinking about, okay, so now we're kind of on the other side of that need-based usage of this space. Where does it live now? And I think,
Mhm.
like, in terms of where is it going, it's really hard to say where it's going because I think we've just arrived in this space,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we got to let that play out. But it's really clear to me that there is a shift happening and a push and pull happening now of like how people are um, opting in or opting out, and the reasons for that. And I have a lot of curiosity about where it will go,
Mhm.
um, both within this community and outside of it. And I'm just, looking forward to sitting back and observing, seeing what
Yeah.
happens.
I mean, I think a lot of it, will return to some things that is coming up in the comments here of, like and what we heard from people, which is that at its core, the thing that, inspires and engages the people the most is real friendships and connections that are and
Mhm.
genuine community that's been able to be made here, and I think what we explore in the deep dive is like, well, what does make community? What level of like trust in this back and forth do you have to like create genuine community? And to your point of like, it's here and we're dealing with it and we don't know where it's going to go. I think we also investigate like, well, where do those pressures come from? Why do we feel those pressures? What
Mm.
are those pressures? I think we definitely dig into a lot because of our own professional perspectives of like, what do we feel like as narrators to uh, secure our careers? Do we feel that we
Mhm.
need to do, and where is that pressure coming from? And is it real or is it perceived?
Yes.
And we dig into a lot of like then the very real connections that we get to make with listeners and our responsibilities to each other to just treat people with mutual respect and understanding,
Mhm.
while still keeping in mind that this is like a very big industry that has like you can't. I think we're pretty good about exploring like you can't deny the real impact on people's lives, and, like, livelihoods for those of us that are
Mhm.
working in this industry, and how that, it informs the way that you engage in a way that some people come to this community just because it's a place where they wanna meet friends with a similar interest, which means you're gonna engage, in a different way. So, yeah,
Mhm.
would recommend going and listening. I mean, it's, just take it in chunks and and bites.
Yeah. If it's not
Uh,
clear, I mean, basically, if you haven't listened yet, um, we use the first couple of episodes as a retrospective of what, how did we get to where we are today? So a lot of the stuff we're kind of talking about now is dissected in those earliest episodes, looking at history of like being in online spaces. And also in terms of what you're talking about now, Samantha, of actors and their livelihoods and where they show up and why. Like from a marketing perspective, we go through that a lot too. So there's a lot to consider, that like unless you
yeah.
kind of that I think the average person is not really, and why would they, really thinking about like, well, it used to be like this, and then it, like we don't do that in our daily lives very often. And so just going
Mhm.
back to like what our own reflections are, I mean, that piece was just really helpful to me, to kind of
Mhm.
to take a look at that history and um how we got to where we are. But I think it helps to kind of address some of the questions that are coming up about like, what impact do various places on the internet have on the current status of the audiobook world and the romance community, and what impact we think will have in the future. I think you kind of have to look back at what came before to have even a sense of that at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's just the point of the importance of context, and I think when we move too
Exactly.
fast and we are consuming so much, you don't have time or the appetite for context. So,
Hmm.
and, Andy mentioned here, I think this is an extension of that. Andy was in the chat, and she was talking about how this, like, the volume of hold on, abundant but superficial connections feel increasingly draining, which I think ties to this
Mm.
concept that really came out of this, at like the speed at which we are generating and expected to consume content, and even as like narrators, the push to like jam our schedules in such a way that we don't get to sit
Mhm.
with the work as much, and that we're just constantly churning and promoting. And I think that that feels very similar to then the types of connections that we get that we're told like we need to make at scale, which is, I think,
Mhm.
just the nature of this, the beast that is, social media and being able to find people. So I do think that maybe as people slow down and try to find those real one-to-one connections, that it'll feel different, right? The way that you show up in a space
Mhm.
that is meant to be at a scale, and then the expectations that we have of ourselves and others for more intimate connections. But I think it's great, that the number of people who have said that, like, they did exactly what we asked, which was like, take a listen, but go find your friends
Yeah.
and have a chat. And in fact, I kind of love that so many people are like, "Yep, talked with my friends. None of your business." I'm like, "Great, none of our business. I'm glad you had that chat." It's really
Yeah,
good,
that's
and
that's the whole thing. Is like go
that's the whole
talk to your
thing.
people about it. Yeah.
Do you wanna talk a little bit about what we wanna do before the end of the year? I think
Yeah.
we did this huge deep dive that was like 5 episodes on one. I think we decided we have 3 roundtables in us before the end of the year,
Mhm.
and we're gonna have those spread out. We don't know the timing on them yet, but the first one, I don't know what order they'll be in, but the first idea we had really came out of this deep dive, and we wanted to highlight a unique perspective that we felt like we hadn't really dug into yet.
Yeah. So, as we were this is a good time to talk about this because we were just discussing like the use of social media, how what's going to happen in the future, and something that we have a lot of curiosity around is the narrators that have come up post 2020. So, knowing that social media really became it, the romance community social media scene really popped during that time, during COVID, and there are a lot of narrators that came up in that space. And that's not our personal stories, and so it's harder to know what that experience is like. So we're going to do an episode and roundtable, bring in on some folks who can really speak to kind of what that looked like and looks like for them, how it, and be able to dissect a little bit about dissect a little bit of what's different about it,
Yeah.
coming up in this community, in the way that it looks now or the way that it has looked post 2020 versus prior, which our very first roundtable was really the opposite, right?
Yeah.
It's like talking with folks that have been here for a long time, sort of pre ACX, pre-social
Mhm.
media being a place that narrators were specifically showing up, and even authors, it was like kind of folks who started out maybe right at that self-publishing boom. And so now we're looking at what's like the current situation of folks that are for whom this is still a newer job, and
Mhm.
um, how they're connecting with work, how they're connecting with authors, and just what that looks like for them.
Yeah, and what those standards are, right? Like, I think that there are
Hmm.
some things, we wanted we're in talks with some narrators and some authors because I think that, there's some very similar things. I think there's some symbiotic, like, relationships that are happening there, that people are coming up together, finding people
Hmm.
earlier. There's also things that just get normalized for people who started in that era, right? Like, people who
Hmm.
started
Hmm.
post-2020 are way more comfortable, putting a camera on and doing these live narrations that are very normal for a
Yeah.
lot of people, where, a lot of narrators that started before then, that's not something that they're used to, and so, like, trying to, like, explore those, where that came from, what that experience is like. So that's one of
Yeah.
them we're really excited for. I think, I'm really curious to see, like, what their perspective is that people get wrong about presuming about somebody who got in after
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
and what we get right, and maybe what's challenging about that we don't know, and what we can kind of learn from each other and those different experiences. So that'll be a
And
good one.
I think it'll allow us to talk and learn a bit more about the book talk space too, because that's a
Yeah.
big part of kind of this new era, this new wave of narrators and authors too, or at least authors who are newer to having their work in audio. So I'm really excited to kind of, because as I've named many times, I don't know anything about TikTok.
Yeah.
So, and sort of like
And I
the
can
place
only
that it
send
holds at the
you
table.
so many TikToks
That's
and be
right.
like so yeah, no, it'll be really good. I'm excited for that one. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, there will be a lot of things hopefully debunked and things that we can learn from each other, which I think is
Mhm.
great. Another one that I feel like is a bit of debunking and like wanting to really dig into and help people understand is dual versus duet versus multicast recordings. What is going on there? How
Mm.
are they different? Why would you wanna choose one or the other? Really kind of trying to dig in to understand, not just on, helping people understand, from a production perspective, how those are different. But for us as actors, how does it feel different
Yeah.
to us to record those? And what types of scripts would be, beneficial for that or the other? Where did the standard sort of even take off? So all of that kind of conversation we want to have.
Mm.
And hopefully, I think one of the things we want to try to do in that one is bring in some scripts that you can kind of hear done in different ways, and
Yeah.
evaluate what, how that changes a text in ways. So that'll be a fun one, I think, and one that again feels like is at a critical mass point that
Mhm.
I'm at least seeing in terms of the asks that are coming into my calendar inbox. In terms of like this used to be like a one-off thing that barely ever happened, and now it's coming up
Right.
frequently. Um, the standards are a little bit different all over the place. It is still a little bit
Mhm.
the Wild West. So yeah.
Yeah, something I'm hoping we get to talk about with whoever our guests will be for that, is also like how this is affecting contracts too. Because I think like, and maybe not what's happening currently, but should there be things written into contracts that aren't yet for these kinds of productions in terms of the way people are collaborating with one another? Because it's a
Yeah.
different kind of beast, and I feel like it's so new. Um, and as you said, there's not necessarily really standards that are happening. So it makes it hard from a narrator perspective to know what you're stepping into, I think, sometimes. And so what could be, what we could be contracted for when thinking about being on these productions, and what we are versus what what we're not seeing yet in those
Mhm.
contracts. I think about that a lot. So I hope we get to talk about that.
Yeah, it should be good. And
Yeah.
then the last one we wanna
Mhm.
get to this year, yeah, talk to us about the last one.
Yeah, so we want to talk about dark romance. It's real popular, and I feel like I've been on a lot of dark romance panels at the events that I've gone to. And there's consistently an interest in, you know, I think from as an actor, there's a lot of questions about what that feels like to be inside of a dark romance, why you would choose to be in one, how it affects you personally, emotionally. And I really enjoy those conversations because I do think, as someone who works in a lot of different genres, dark romance is its own space. It's like
Mhm.
the approach to those stories is so different, I think, than anything else that I do. And there's a lot to kind of navigate there. I think people are also often have a lot of questions for authors about,
Yeah.
the why of writing that, the sort of research element of it. There's so also dark romance is a pretty broad description. Like, what does that means? A
Mhm.
lot of different things to a lot of different people, which is something I'm really interested in discussing a little bit, because I think what's considered dark romance is shifting a lot.
Yeah.
I've done dark romances for most of my career. I mean, some of my earliest romance books were very, very dark. And I've been in that space for a long time. And over those, over the decade of time or something like that, but yeah, about a decade that I've been doing books in that genre, it's changed
Yeah.
drastically. And so I think I'm hoping we'll get to kind of dig into that a little bit, what the different definitions are of dark romance and why it varies from maybe from author to author or person to person, and what the expectations are.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I want to talk about.
I mean, I think what all 3 of these topics really share in common is, a degree of debunking, a degree of giving some
Mhm,
space to understand things that I think people have misconceptions about. I think they're all things that we've seen pop up in our research of this last deep dive, that in conversation with people, people had some immediate and clear and strong opinions on. And I'm not sure
mhm,
that those where do those come from? Why do they come from? And what are we not fully understanding about each of these things? Whether or not it's, newer
mhm,
authors and narrators breaking in a post 2020, post TikTok world, people who love their duels versus duets, and why aren't authors doing it one way or the other? And like, why do all these
mhm.
people love dark romance so much? So I think there's a lot here to like uncover and explore and, like, better understand, which, I'm always those are the conversations I'm always really excited for.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Um, there's, yeah, so I think that that's it. Somebody else just threw in a question here at the end, which really feels like it'll take us all on one. The great Gabsby, I might message you about this, which is a question about attending events and, um, our our experience on them and the value on them and what do we have to invest in them, which feels like
Mm.
it's a
Well,
great
that's in
question.
the yeah, and it's in the 5-part series. We do a whole episode that is focused on in-person events. I don't know if the question is specifically about narrators. Is that what they're asking?
Yeah, they said when
Or
we
is it
attend
just
an
in
event, are
general?
you expected to pay for a table like authors do? Yes. Sometimes we're
Oh,
sponsored,
oh,
but
yeah.
yes, and, but there is a cost associated. And but
Oh, yeah, that's a
the for the second question about, the value we place on the events or what do we get out of them, there's no income generated because there's nothing we can really sell.
mhm,
But, the value that we place on them, we do dig into that in the conversation, and it is like
yeah. Mhm,
there's a lot of different things that come out and are really beneficial about those
yeah.
experiences and attending them and connecting to community.
Is that episode 3?
I
Or
think so.
11.3? The
Yeah.
third in the 5-part series, I think, is where we focus on that. And in that one, well, throughout the series, we kind of pepper in these audio clips from folks that we spoke to at Book Bonanza. But in that, what I think is the third one, 11.3, um, you hear a lot of that, a lot from folks who attend events. But then we also talk about um,
Our
attending events
experience,
as a
yeah.
narrator. Uh huh.
Yeah, yeah. It's a big it's a it's a big lots of lots of things to say about that one.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
okay, well, amazing. What are you off to work on the rest of this week?
I'm going on vacation on Saturday for a week to the beach.
Nice.
So I'm trying
Jealous.
to, yes, I'm very excited. So I'm trying to finish up, I think it's the third book in an ongoing series I've been working on. That's all I'm going to say about it. It's like
Mhm.
romantic suspense, I think would be the
Nice.
the
I love
category it
those.
falls into. This is by an author I really love and a series I've really enjoyed being a part of. So I'm excited to wrap this one up. And then I think we have one more left in that series that I get to next month. And then that'll be it for this particular series. That's what I'm working on right now. What about you?
Nice. I'm on my last day of this one that I can't talk about. It's with a co-narrator I've never worked with before, and he recorded before me, and I'm having this really lovely experience with the text because I prepped it, but I prepped it kind of like in a frazzled brain space a while ago. And so
Mm,
I'm one as an of like having a really great experience with it in the booth because I'm like I feel very present with this text and I feel like I'm making like really exciting just discoveries with it, like, and it flows really easy. It's a writer that I haven't worked with before, and there's just something about their writing that really just comes very easily to me and is, like, flowing really
mm,
lovely, and because it's a narrator that I haven't worked with before and he recorded before me, I have all his audio that I'm kind of scanning through and getting to, like, listen to and, like, learning
mhm.
somebody's, like, new voice and their kind of energy and their cadence. Because like, obviously, like, we're never doing, like, impressions of the people that we work
Right.
with, but just trying to energetically emulate them, and so it's been really enjoyable, because it's been a long time since I've had the opportunity to, like, really settle into somebody's voice in that way that we nerd out about
Mm,
all the time
mhm.
of, like, how do they approach this? So that's been great. So I finished that today, and then I start tomorrow. I go back to my OG, Shell Bliss. So, that's gonna be wonderful and lovely for all the reasons that going home is.
Mhm. That's nice. Yeah, that's fun. It's fun to get to work with somebody new, and it's like a whole new box of crayons when you have a new voice that you're that you're working with. So that's great.
I find it always makes me
Enjoy.
confront what my kind of, go-to habits are, like,
Mm, mhm,
'cause I mean, like, I always do that vocally, so, right, like, I'm gonna go someplace vocally for all the stable of, like, other men or whatever, and it makes me really observe what I naturally just wanna do, to my voice there when I'm trying to
mhm,
give it something that is more in line with, like, a new voice, a new narrator, and it's nice
mhm.
because it makes me feel like I can, like, stretch that muscle in a different way and be like, "Oh, that texture feels that energy feels, like, a little bit different." So, it's
Yeah,
nice.
and I think it often can then contribute to future books too, because
Yeah.
I mean, a lot. I've heard a lot of other narrators talk about this. That we have um, a lot of us sort of channel the different narrators that we know and that we've worked with, even if we're not working with them on a given book. Like a character kind of stands out as, oh, this is like a Teddy Hamilton character, so you kind of channel the things you might do if you were narrating a book with him for this particular character. And so
Right.
if you're working with new people and picking up new sounds, and like a new approach, you now have that to work with going forward, which
Yeah, you
is
cast
kind of
them in
cool.
future books. Can I say that
Right.
I did a book just recently, and it was, like, 4th or whatever in a series, and I had to laugh because I was like, "Man, this is gonna be a real acting challenge," but it was really great because all the women that were previously cast, it was me, and then before me was, Maxine Mitchell, Emma Wilder, and Stella Hunter, and having to who I feel like are all in a eh, distinct, but in a category, and it was this really, like, great acting challenge of, like, but okay, wait, let me go back and, like, listen, because there's definitely a way that
Mhm.
they each approach, character and vocal qualities that is different, and I
Mhm.
can't just kind of generally, like, put them in the same vocal range because they kind of live in a
Right.
same vocal range. So I had to
Uh-huh.
go, like, one layer beyond it, and it was, like, a fun little, like, like, exercise to, like, distinguish, all while all the girls were at brunch together.
Right. It's those blessed like meal scenes
Yeah.
where every character in the book is there. Always shows up
Mm.
somewhere in a book.
No, it's so
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, well, I'm very jealous of your vacation. I hope it's glorious and that all the things get wrapped up before then. Thanks everybody for popping in and joining us for this check-in. I do hope you go, savor all 5 episodes of this deep dive, which you can find on YouTube at the Rosemore Roundtable, but we're on Spotify, Apple Podcast, anywhere you get a podcast, you can find us and you should definitely
Mhm.
check it out. And we hope that you guys all have your own lovely ends of the weeks and gorgeous weekends ahead.
Mhm.
Bye.